You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to episode 139 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. After a deep dive on music and recovery, focusing on punk and hardcore in the previous episode, and more on that at the end of this episode, this week we will be focusing on SAA Service. With the International Conference coming up this October, areas should be holding area assemblies to pick a delegate and allow GSRs to discuss the 8 business motions that will be voted upon. Whoa, what did all that just mean? If you didn't understand some of that, don't worry, you are not alone. We thought it would be a great way to spread the word about the SAA service structure with a conversation here on the podcast. Before getting to our discussion, I'll be talking about some of the abbreviations that we use in the conversation, and to kick us off, I chose a reading on SAA history from the SAA Service Manual, which I found on the ISO's Service website, saa-iso.org, and I wanted to preface that this is only a draft copy that was written in June of 2024. And I wanted to read the first about page and a half coming from chapter 1, a brief history of SAA and the International Service Organization, and this is on page 4. The ISO of SAA Inc. is a nonprofit corporation established by the SAA Fellowship to provide a central point of communication and to serve as a resource in support of the primary purpose of member groups, namely to carry the SAA message to the sex addict who still suffers. The idea for the founding of SAA developed when 2 therapists, struggling with their own issues, took a walk around Lake Harriet in Minneapolis in 1977. From their discussion that day emerged the idea of applying the principles and program laid out in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous to the problem of obsessive sexual thoughts and compulsive sexual behavior, later dubbed as sex addiction. The first group was established in Minneapolis. The seed had been planted. Others in search of help with the same issues also began meeting together, and the Fellowship of SAA began to grow. In the early days, the Twin Cities Intergroup functioned as a central office for the Fellowship. As the Fellowship grew outside of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, however, it became apparent that a more formal service organization would be needed. In 1990, the National Service Organization, NSO, meeting of interested group representatives in Minneapolis in 1991. The bylaws essentially define the basic structure of the service organization. Delegates elected by member groups were defined as the members of the corporation. In addition, a board of trustees was created to manage the business and coordinate the activities of the corporation. And a literature committee, Litcom, was assigned supervisory authority over the content of materials published by the corporation. The NSO became the publisher of SAA literature. As the fellowship grew, it became apparent that it would be advantageous to have a full-time staff person. In 1993, the NSO office was moved to Houston, Texas, and an office manager was hired, and later the position title was changed to Director of Fellowship Service. 3 years later, as interest in SAA extended outside the United States, the name of the NSO was changed to the International Service Organization, or ISO. Since that time, full-time and part-time staff have been added as the need for support services has grown. The ISO continues to publish SAA literature. The development and evolution of information technology have advanced the capacity of the ISO to keep track of and be responsive to a rapidly growing fellowship. The ISO also coordinates communication with member groups and among various components within the ISO. Emergence of the internet opened new opportunities for SAA to be found by people suffering from sex addiction, and more recently, robust video conferencing platforms and the increasing capabilities of handheld devices have greatly improved the ability of the ISO to communicate internally and to reach out to sex addicts worldwide. On multiple occasions over the following years, the bylaws were amended to clarify ambiguities and to position the ISO to better serve the fellowship. Additional support staff have been hired as the demands on the office have grown and as contribution from members and member groups have provided needed funds. Today, an executive director, additional full-time, part-time, and contract employees staff the ISO office. In 2011, the board established an ISO structure committee to evaluate the existing structure of the ISO and to make recommendations for improvements that would enhance the capacity of the ISO to serve the fellowship. As a result of that work, amendments to the bylaws were proposed in 2013 and ratified by the conference in 2014 to restructure the ISO in two significant ways. Number one, to change the method of election of the board and LitCom members to at-large elections, and number two, to change the composition of the ISO conference to delegates elected by areas, which would be smaller than the current regions. As a result, Group Service Representatives, or GSRs, from member groups will meet together in Area Assemblies to consider issues of interest to the fellowship and the ISO. Each area will then elect a delegate to represent them at the ISO conference. These changes were phased in over a 5-year period. It was anticipated that this new structure would allow increased communication and greater participation by members of the fellowship to whom the ISO looks for spiritual guidance. And that is about the first half of the brief history of the ISO and the service structure. So I wanted to read that, especially that last paragraph, point number 2. And that really is the focus of what this episode is all about. The changing service structure in the ISO from regions to areas, and how we pick delegates to go to the conference. How the conference and convention used to be one item and have been split into two separate functions. The conference being the business meeting that happens in October, and the convention, which is more speakers and workshops that happens in May and is rotated from city to city. In 2018, there was the split, and it looks like they are going to be going back to joining those in 2025. And so we do get into that in this discussion. And I've talked a little bit about service structure on episode 129 with my workshop called Service Keeps You Sober that I recorded at the 2024 Bay Area Retreat. In that workshop, I was talking about service at the local meeting level, at the intergroup level, and specifically the Bay Area intergroup, and then at the area level. And in that episode, we were focused mainly on the areas that cover Northern California. Those would be areas 40, 41, 42, and 77. The same principle applies worldwide. And so for this conversation, we did have some members of the Conference Steering Committee, the CSC. I did want to talk about some of the abbreviations before going to that conversation. So in this episode, we're mainly talking about the Conference Steering Committee, the CSC. We also briefly talk about the Area Coordinating Committee, and that was just retired last year after the conference. So the ACC is no longer. They basically split up the entire world into over 80 areas, and that is ever expanding, as we will talk about in this conversation. Some of the other abbreviations that I did want to talk about was the Group Service Representative, or GSR. I also did want to describe Area Assemblies, and that is a meeting of GSRs within a recognized ISO area for the purpose of discussing issues of concern to the member groups within the area and issues under consideration by the ISO conference. And at the end of this episode, I will touch briefly on the 8 things that are going to be talked about at the conference. The one that confuses me the most, at least in terms of the abbreviation, is the ICC, and I kept referring to it as the Intergroup Coordination Committee, but it is the Intergroup Communication Committee, and that's where intergroups from around the world get together once a month to discuss things that various intergroups are doing. So yeah, I know that we have so many different abbreviations for things, and it does tend to get confusing. So I wanted to mention those a little bit up front before we kick off into this conversation. And so now, without further ado, I'm turning it over to this conversation about areas, GSRs, and the conference. I hope you enjoy. I've covered a lot of stuff about areas and GSRs before, but it would be nice to have an in-depth conversation around this sort of stuff with people who are on the CSC. Because yeah, when I talk to other people in the program, a lot of them have an understanding, but they're not really involved. Yeah, the other day I tried to explain some of the stuff that I was going to be talking about tonight, and one guy's just like, yeah, you're making my head explode.
It's kind of amazing how it can be that we've been so long into this format now that so many people don't understand it or haven't even heard of it. Heard of a GSR, but no idea what it even stands for. Because, we throw out these acronyms all the time, and there are so many people that just kind of shake their head and go, yeah, what is a CSC?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember when we were first signing up GSRs back in 2018, we had no idea what the duties of a GSR was going to be, but we had the forms at least, and we could get people signed up, and we didn't do an area assembly until I think 2020, something like that. I'm not sure if we did anything in 2019.
Yeah, 2020 was the first year we formally had area delegates attend the conference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, since it is the 4 of us and it's about 5 after, I'll go ahead and get started. If anyone else joins us, that's awesome. But we do have Darren F., who has been on a ton of episodes talking about the concepts, the tradition studies that we've done. There might have been another topic discussion.
So it's good to be here, Jason. Yeah. Thank you, Jason. Great to be here.
Yeah. And we also have Dave, and Dave approached me. So in the Bay Area, we have 4 different areas. And I am the area chair for Area 40, which is the South Bay. And Dave is the area chair for 42, which is the North Bay. And that goes all the way up to Northern California and out to Reno. So welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be here.
Awesome. And we also have Tom, who is the chair of the Conference Steering Committee, CSC. And Tom, where are you located?
I am in St. Louis, Missouri, Area 22, which is Missouri and Kansas.
Okay, awesome. And welcome, Tom. Yeah, so Dave approached me with this idea of doing this on the podcast, and I've done a little bit of it in the workshop that I did at the retreat. And recently there have been a lot of CSC meetings, looking for areas that we want to help set up the area mentorship. And we're trying to get a lot of the areas involved, group service representatives for each meeting that can send their GSRs to an area assembly. And then those area assemblies can pick a delegate that will go to the conference, which is in October. And this year it is on Zoom. And there's been a lot of news about various things that are happening with the conference this year and next year. So we'll get into that. But if anyone wants to take lead on talking about the transition of how we used to operate, and I've tried to explain it a couple of times, but going from each meeting having a person that would go to a region or something, and each meeting could send a delegate to the conference, and how things have shifted over time. So anyone want to jump in with that?
Well, this is Darren from Dallas. I'm going to put Tom on the spot, right? Because Tom's been around a couple of years, and so I'm gonna go to his experience. Tom, is it like 30 years or something? Tom, how long have you been in SAA?
I guess I've been an SAA member since 1988.
Dang, nice.
And I got involved in this stuff. I was volunteered by someone in my intergroup. Actually, I was a chronic relapser for many years, and the period of sobriety that I'm in now kind of coincided, the beginning of that sobriety period. I guess it's not a coincidence. It coincided with the beginning of my service. So, so yeah, when I started about roughly 20 years ago, going to conferences and getting on the LitCom, the Literature Committee, and also the Charter Committee, which was kind of a predecessor committee to the areas and everything. It was one of the committees that helped get all this set up. The delegates were coming from the groups, and different people had different issues with that, but the issues that I saw were things like, if we met in, let's say, Chicago, we would get all these delegates from the Chicago area. They would be like half the delegates would be local people. And then the next year we would move to, some big town, LA, and half the delegates would be from LA. So you weren't getting a real good cross-section of the fellowship each year. Another issue was that it could be expensive. To really be a delegate, you needed to stay in a hotel for 2 or 3 days, nights, and travel. So we were very well represented by large groups and groups from like more affluent areas, but other like smaller groups and groups that couldn't afford that weren't there. It wasn't a big pool of people that each group was drawing from often. And so sometimes people would just come for like part of the conference, even though they were a delegate. The convention and the conference were together. The convention being a more recovery thing and the conference being, a business meeting for SAA. And so people would say like, oh, well, I'll go to the conference for the first day, but it's kind of boring. It's not so good stuff. So I'm going to go on the hike or the golf outing the second day. And then a more serious thing, if I know I'm going on and on, but one other problem in that era was that we had these regions. And a lot of the service structure was set up in each region. And in my own region, which I think we were North Central, I was in Minnesota at that time. This guy came to the conference. We had one person who was supposed to be handling all the mail to prisoners in our region. And, he had been relapsing a lot. And he came to the conference meeting and he had a sack of like dozens and dozens of letters from people in prison who were trying to get from SAA. And he said, yeah, I just haven't been able to do this. And I was like, okay, all these people in prison asking SAA for help were not getting a letter back. And I said, wow, our system is broken, So that's how I got involved in the whole area thing.
Thanks, Tom. So, yeah, I remember for myself, I had a similar situation where I had a full-blown relapse and, I'd been in the program for quite a while. And in order to get back on my feet again, I really got into service outside of just the meeting level, starting off at intergroup and then eventually chairing the Bay Area intergroup and doing various things like the retreat committee and being involved in a lot of local stuff. And it really wasn't until the podcast that, I started branching out a lot more and being able to attend more things in this day of Zoom. It's amazing just to be able to jump on an ISO call, whether it's with the ICC, it's the Intergroup Coordination Committee. Dave, if you want to correct me on that.
It's the Intergroup Communications Committee. Yeah, and to be able to jump on calls and get to know everyone across the country. I've never attended a conference. I have attended a few of the conventions. So getting into service in this way through the podcast has been a really awesome thing. And I want to, while Dave, you're here and unmuted, I know you're a little bit under the weather. So if you are up to it, I'd like to hear your perspective on being an area chair and being on the ICC and the various things that you've been doing. Yeah, thanks, Jason. It's been a good journey for me. I too am, I realized the importance of service, and like yourself, starting out in the meeting level and pretty much did all the service positions at the different meetings that I belonged to. And I got elected intergroup rep for a meeting. And I started going to intergroup meetings. And as soon as I walked in the door, it was like in no time, I found myself being the vice chair.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, I'll do it. No one else was stepping up. And the very next year, the chair decided that he'd been doing it long enough and asked me if I would take it over. And I did that for a number of years. I don't even know how many, 6, 7, basically until the whole area concept came in and I took over as area chair. And I decided, even though the meetings are few and far between for the area, that I didn't need to gobble up all the positions, and I relinquished that. So I'm the group service rep now for our intergroup, and I still have been very much involved in that aspect. Yeah, and I went to my very first conference in Orlando, Florida, and that was pre-COVID, and my intergroup gave me a $400 stipend, and the rest of the expenses were out of my pocket. And I was of the other side of the coin. I knew I was there to do the business aspect, and I had to, I wanted to figure it out and see what it was all about. And so I think I went to one of the workshops, maybe two, that I kind of snuck in. And I've just always been very service oriented, put it that way.
Yeah. And so with the Intergroup Coordination Committee, the ICC,
communication.
Keep saying
it's
that.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll just say the ICC. So how long have you been doing that? And may have mentioned it on the podcast, but to let our listeners know what the ICC does.
So I kind of got into it. I actually, at the very beginning of this, I had like a grievance, and I wasn't really thrilled with the area alignment. And it really wasn't clear to me how to go about making change, or, that there was an area communications committee, and that there were means in which you could, say, hey, this isn't working for us, and maybe there's a better way, and try to get it taken care of, which all comes back to the conference the following year, to be voted on. So, I started attending the ACC meetings, and I quickly found out that they didn't want me there. They didn't want to hear what I was having to say. So I was kind of ushered into the Intergroup Communications Committee and did that. And just this last year, I've been acting as the vice chair of the Intergroup Communications Committee. And I was asked to be the mentor and start attending the area development meetings for the CSC, Conference Steering Committee meetings. So I started and, looked into doing the mentorship and went through the training with Tom and Darren and started to run with that and found a lot of opposition. There's just a lot of people who just really don't know what it's about and how it works. And some of them are up to listening and some aren't. And, you can just do what you can do. And that's where I kind of got in my head that knowing about your podcast, that this would be a good area for us to reach out to people all over who tune in. And by all over, I mean all over the world, because it's available.
Yeah.
And we are an international organization and have areas in lots of different countries, and they're welcome to join us, and we love that idea and we solicit that. So that's where the idea came from.
Awesome. Yeah. And Darren, I'm going to turn it to you, how you got involved in all of this. And I do want to talk about, some of the areas that haven't been registered and things that we're doing, like the Area 75 that we've been working on last week and this week. And
it's super exciting. Before I forget, a couple things I think will be important that we talk about just briefly, like differences between the intergroup and an area. That term GSR, Group Service Representative, which is really designed and created for area service, but we see that it's also kind of has an extra duty of intergroup rep / area person. So I want to talk about that a little bit. But, so I'm an area chair for the Area 28, which is the North Texas area. Texas has 3 areas. And in the area that I have the privilege of chairing, we have about 64 registered SAA meetings. And an area really only needs to meet as an area at least our area meets about 4 times a year. Some might meet 3, some could meet more. There's no rule or law around that. But what my experience is over the last couple of years of being a chair is 4 meetings works pretty well. Mm-hmm. And so we're about to have the 3rd of our 4th meeting later this week as an area. And so as an area chair, my job is to simply organize and invite group service representatives from the 64 meetings to an assembly where those ideally I'd have 64 folks on a Zoom call. Mm-hmm. What am I going to have? I don't know. I'm going to be happy if there's 6, 10, mm-hmm. Right? I'll be thrilled if there were 12. That'd be amazing, right? So 10 or 20% is kind of the expectation might be. We're going to get on a Zoom call and we're going to express the voice of our individual meetings, right? So those GSRs that are coming from those individual meetings are going to get a chance to dissect the 8 motions that are coming out this year, mm-hmm. And also express any other issues, right? So what are the issues that you're facing in Sex Addicts Anonymous? What are the issues of your meeting? Hey, our meeting's concerned with where our 7 tradition donations are going, right? Maybe we want to have a more detailed report of what that is. Maybe we're not satisfied with the literature, whatever it is. Maybe we don't have a very effective way of communicating our needs and our wishes and our issues to the fellowship. And so, again, the GSR's role is to bring that voice of their little meeting on the corner to the area structure, and then that delegate then that gets elected from those 64 GSRs, those 64 meetings, is going to carry that area group conscience to the conference in October via Zoom. It's always going to be hybrid. I think from this point on, it might be in person and hybrid Zoom, or it might be Zoom only type of thing. This year, it's Zoom only in October. And so if you don't have a GSR, if your area is not meeting, it's unfortunate you don't have a way of being heard.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that I feel better, I grow spiritually by expressing my voice, and having a place for that to be heard, and also hearing other people's needs, desires, wishes, and experience. So, it's just really neat to be a part of it. I like what was shared earlier about how once I get involved in service, my sobriety just grows. Mm-hmm. It's so much easier to grow spiritually when I'm being of service and thinking about others' needs. And so again, I'm going to be passing off the torch next year to the next area chair. One of my jobs as an area chair is to try to find someone to replace me, because we rotate service positions in this fellowship according to our traditions. But I'll kind of pass with that. But I'd really love to clear up, how is the intergroup different? How is the area different? What is the GSR's primary role? And go from there.
Yeah. I wanted to jump in with that, and then I'll turn it over to either Tom or Dave. In the Bay Area, our intergroup was well established years and years before the split to change to group service representatives. And when we went to areas, each of the sections of the Bay Area got split into 4 different areas. So our intergroup doesn't represent just one area. Our intergroup represents now 4 areas. So it's a little bit more difficult to do area work at our intergroup, but there are other intergroups around the country that I know of that their intergroup is the same core group of meetings that is the same as the area. And so they can serve both functions, but the intergroup is more of a local function, and the GSRs and areas is more of the conduit between our meetings and the International Service Organization and the conference. So that is my perspective on it, and I wanted to turn it over to Tom or Darren if you had something that you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, real quick. I think you're absolutely right. So every meeting in SAA, of which there's, I don't know what it's now, 2,200 plus or minus a few worldwide. Mm-hmm. So every meeting, if a meeting formally registers themselves as an SAA meeting with the ISO, they're going to be put into an area. So whether the meeting likes it or not, wants to participate or not, they will be put in an area. And so again, it's up to that meeting to choose to participate, to express their voice. And like we shared earlier, some meetings don't want to express their voice, and that's okay. They have that right? So it's a choice, but they're in an area. So they do have their right, unlike the intergroup, which again supports the local meetings, and so the area is not going to create a website. The area is not going to host retreats. The area is not going to answer the fall call from the newcomer, right? That's more of an intergroup role, right? Type of service opportunity there. And an intergroup's an autonomous meeting. It's not a part of the legal structure. The area is created in our bylaws, and it's a part of the legal structure of our nonprofit. So I'll pass.
Yep. Tom, what are your thoughts?
Well, Darren just mentioned the nonprofit, and one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is how there are these other kind of service organizations in our society where you basically, you have some purpose. Like a lot of nonprofits are like this. There's some problem or some issue that they're trying to address. They hire a handful of people or some people to do it, and then the supporters or the members fundraise. And they basically hire these people to take care of it. And that is not our situation at all. Organization. We do have paid staff, but their job is really to facilitate the 12-step work, because the way this is set up, not only are all of us members, all of us groups responsible for how we welcome the newcomer, what we give them in terms of literature, and what is our program, what is this thing that's supposedly going to save your life. But we need it too, right? We need the work to stay sober. So there's a whole thing about, the traditions 2 and 4, tradition 2 that talks about our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. 4 talks about each group being autonomous, but then we have this overarching organization, the rest of SAA, this board of trustees and this conference and these service committees that work on behalf of SAA as a whole. Well, how is it all related? And that's where the 12 concepts come in, and they basically tell us, that the groups and the areas are responsible for the organization. We do have people who are doing stuff in various committees and the office in Houston, on the board of trustees, but they answer to the organization as a whole. And the decisions are made at the conference, about the things that affect the whole of SAA. And that's also where all those committees and the board and the staff report to the organization they serve. That's where oversight happens. If the groups aren't sending a GSR to the area where they can elect a delegate and support the delegate to go to the conference, if that part isn't in place, the whole oversight function, the whole us being responsible for our own organization and really our own recovery, the whole system where we show up to stay sober, but then we create this way of welcoming the newcomer and this way of communicating our program, our 12-step program, like that all falls apart if the areas aren't functioning. So the GSR and the delegate coming from the area to the conference are key to having a 12-step fellowship that actually follows those traditions and concepts.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to sit in on one of the CSC meetings the other day, and it was really awesome to get to learn how a lot of this stuff works. So in the transition into GSRs and areas started with the split of at least in my eyes, I know that there were things that were in the charter and things that were voted on in previous conferences, but the split with the conference and the convention was in 2018. And so the Bay Area had the convention there in May, and that's all the workshops and things like that. And then the following October was where the first split conference happened. And as we were signing up people to be GSRs, we were going out to our meetings. One of my passion projects is going out to the meetings, at least in Area 40, but trying to get other people in the Bay Area involved. During the COVID lockdown, our communications just went kaplooey. So we had a central meeting, the big San Francisco 815 meeting. about 120 people would show up at that. And it was a great distribution for information. So people from all parts of the Bay Area would attend that. And then when COVID happened, that wasn't happening. We noticed that we didn't have proper contact information for meetings. A lot of meetings stopped sending intergroup reps, and we were doing a lot of this at the intergroup level. And trying to get people registered as GSRs was really difficult. But yeah, a couple of friends of mine, we took our list of meetings and split it up and said, hey, I'm going to go to this meeting, and this meeting, and try to recruit people. But it was nice for us that we were able to get our areas up and running. And so that was fantastic. But joining the CSC meeting the other day, I could see how various parts of the world, and including telemeetings, which I want to get to, a lot of these meetings have started up and they are automatically assigned to an area. But if the area isn't registered and there's no leadership, nothing is happening. And so, yeah, I signed up a bunch of GSRs for telemeeting, Zoom meetings, and they're registered. But if they have no leadership in that area, there's no area assemblies. And so it's like, I don't know what you guys are going to do. At least you're registered and you get emails from the ISO. But now that we're trying to get more and more of those abandoned areas up and running. And Dave, I see that you've got an idea there.
Yeah. One of the things when I was making phone calls and reaching out to the different meetings that don't have area representation is that I would just tell them, hey, the reality is if there's two meetings in close proximity and you have contact information, like this guy comes to your meeting, sometimes you go to that meeting, the two of you can form an area. Mm-hmm. Just like forming a meeting. I mean, all it takes is two people. You can be your area. You can get it started and go from there. You just have to elect one of you a GSR, and someone has to chair the meeting and kind of run with the program and register with the ISO. And the other thing that's really kind of important and I really want to touch on is service burnout, because there are so many people that have been doing these jobs for so many years. And there comes a point in time where it just starts to get overwhelming and too much, and they need to kick back and take a break. And I'm going to come back to this.
Okay. Pick up on that theme. The kind of, traditional or customary way to get, one of the main ways to get people into service is that those people that Dave was talking about, rotation is so important. And it's mentioned, we don't have a long form of the traditions yet in SAA, but in the original traditions, they were written in what's called the long form. And they talk a lot about rotation and how important it is that individual members don't claim any committee seat as their personal turf. That destroys the service culture. So one of the easiest ways out of that is those of us who are doing the service raise our sponsees to be in service, and it's not that easy. I've got two guys that I thought both were going to be, in the international level by now, and neither one of them started and just, it didn't really go well for him. And the other one, he had some career changes. It wasn't a good time for him to make that level of commitment. But if we can bring the members we sponsor into service and get that rotation, I don't know. On one hand, what I think about burnout is that, like, if I burn out on staying sober, I'm really in trouble. On the other hand, my way of staying sober does not necessarily always need to include a job in the, we call it the ISO service positions, right? Like, I don't always need to be on the CSC or charter committee or LIDCOM. I can take a break from that, but I don't ever take a break from some kind of service, whether it's sponsorship or at the local group level,
Yeah.
But I don't know what's going on with that. I look at some of my fellow, service junkies, and I'm watching to see when they introduce we have this new person on the committee, and They're from the same town as I am. As a matter of fact, I'm their sponsor,
Mm-hmm.
Watching to see that. But it's a board goal right now, and it's a good one, which is building the service of a culture of service. I really think that, because it's my own experience, I want to go out to all the chronic relapsers and say, hey, find a service job where you can, only have 3 or 6 months of sobriety, but you're doing something really meaningful, and, kind of bootstrap from being a chronic relapser who goes to one meeting a week and doesn't do much in between meetings except relapse
Mm-hmm.
to somebody who's got homework for their committee, more meetings, service commitments, get that first year, and become eligible for more positions. But I don't know. It's all like catching lightning in a bottle, I think, a little bit.
Yeah. To circle back to where I was going to take that train of thought before the dog went wild, the importance of step 12 and carrying the message to the sex addict who still suffers. The truth of the matter is that without the structure of the ISO, we would not have a program. We wouldn't have the material. We wouldn't have the chips. We wouldn't have the bylaws. We wouldn't have the traditions and concepts. And should, for some reason, these positions not be filled and people don't carry this on, it jeopardizes the whole program. And to that vein, that's why it's important to me to be involved, because there's no question that it's changed my life, saved my life, made me a better person. The reality is, I don't even know if I'd be alive still if I wasn't in this program. So, in my opinion, it's got to maintain. I'll pass.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. This is Darren. Just to continue, I want to get into the telemeetings, the Area 75 here. But again, just a great reminder that, again, if I've drawn a sober breath today, it has a lot to do with the people that came before me and the work that they've done prior to me getting here. And so I've been around 14 years. So when I meet someone who's been around since 1988, I think I met Tom at a conference several years ago. I love it. The more sex addicts I know, the better I do. Again, whether you've been around 20, 30 or one day, the more sex addicts I know, the better. And so when I get involved in service and I learn from the experience of those who've been before, I'm more effective at carrying the SAA message. And I'm a better example of what I hope that my sponsees do, which is follow in my footsteps of service. If I'm not being of service, the folks that I'm sponsoring, they're not going to be of service, right? And so I need to be a demonstration of these principles and a demonstration of the spiritual awakening in my life. So let's go to the telemeetings because it's a large chunk of SAA meetings. It's probably about 400-ish, plus or minus a few electronic SAA meetings out there. That's a big chunk when the total's around 2,200 SAA meetings. So there's 4 electronic areas. One of those areas has not met at all since we started meeting as an area, or sending area delegates in 2020, and that was Area 75. And Area 75 consists of about 230 meetings now. And so there were 230 meetings. I don't know how many sex addicts are in each of those meetings. I don't know, 10, 20. I'm not going to do math in public, so I'll let you all do the math. Yeah, that's a lot of sex addicts.
I know the noon meeting is like 70 to 100 people per day.
Right. Yeah. So, right. There's a noon meeting that meets 7 days a week, and all those sex addicts attending that meeting were not having an opportunity to have their voice heard or hear the voice of the fellowship both ways. And so yesterday, for the first time in these 4 years, Area 75 elected some area trusted servants. We've got a chair, we got a vice chair, we got a secretary and a treasurer. There's 4 people of those 200 plus meetings. Of the 200 meetings, we had about 10 respond with, hey, I want to try to help. And so out of the 10, we got 4 to commit to be a trusted servants, and those others are going to help out, and they're going to call their first Area 75 assembly in a couple of weeks. And so finally, for the first time, those 200 plus meetings will have a place to be heard. I don't know how many are going to show up. That's God's business, but they're going to make an effort to invite those folks to attend and hear the needs, express the voice, come up with a yay and nay on those 8 motions, elect a delegate. That delegate's going to take those yays and nays and go participate in the conference on Zoom. It's where it starts, right? And so it's not complicated. It's not hard. It's not a huge time commitment. It just takes a couple of people to get together with a passion for helping the sex addict that still suffers and continuing this fellowship. Again, if SAA is not here, that's my fault, right? SAA is not going to fail because of an outside entity, stopping SAA from being a thing. SAA is going to fail because of the sex addicts within Sex Addicts Anonymous deciding that we don't care anymore, right? And so I want SAA to be here to save my life. And so one of the small ways that I can pay that back is can I spend a couple hours a year talking about SAA and talking about the business and conducting the business? Yeah. My sponsor always says, Darren, you do a lot, but can you do a little bit more? And I hate that question because, the honest answer is, I could probably do a little bit more.
Yeah.
And like we shared earlier, we rotate, right? It's not like I have to spend more time doing a whole bunch of other things, but I should spend my time doing just different things, same amount of time, different things every year, do something a little different, right? So I've had the pleasure of being the ICC chair and ICC rep and intergroup rep and intergroup chair and CSC member and area, lots of different stuff. And I've been blessed. Again, I haven't been bored once in 14 years. If you're bored, call us. Right?
There's plenty definitely to do.
I'll pass, Jason.
Yeah. So I'm hoping to get some good service rotation in our area. We're having an assembly this coming weekend, and it's been difficult because like I had mentioned, or we had mentioned before, the percentage of people that show up. So our area currently has, I think, about 26 meetings. And of those, the past couple of area assemblies have been about 4 or 5 people. And so when we've got 3 service positions and those people are already there and it's time to rotate service positions, not much is happening. So we're really hoping to get some fresh blood in there and people that want to step up. For me, being the area chair, also doing intergroup, also doing the podcast, it's a lot. And so I get forgetful for trying to set up area assemblies. So at least with this one, I've scheduled one for August and one for September already. Our August one, we're going to be discussing the 8 business motions that are going to be at the conference in October, and hopefully have that spread out to our meetings and get the meetings group conscience. We'll come back in September, elect a delegate and discuss the group conscience. One of the things that's really nice about this year's conference is that it is Zoom only. The registration is $60, and our intergroup has already pledged half of that. So we just need to raise a couple more bucks and we're good to go. In years past, where we actually sent a delegate physically, it was helping pay for the flights and the hotel, and so we had X amount of dollars that we could give, depending on what the budget was. And one of the things that I'm grateful for in the Bay Area is that we do have the intergroup that helps. We have in our budget allocated money for the various areas if they so choose. The problem that we've had with 2 of our areas is the leadership sort of crumbled and there wasn't service rotation and no one is in charge of calling for a new assembly. So hopefully those areas, I've been giving them some pep talks and hopefully they'll get up and running. And it sounds like at least one of them is going to be meeting in the next couple of weeks.
I wonder if we might talk about barriers of entry or confusion on the barriers of entry into the area structure and service. Because as an area mentor, when I reach out to areas, there's a lot of misunderstanding. And so as a fellowship, we got to grow in this area. We got to help. If you register as a meeting or as a GSR, you ought to be given some information about the area that you're registering. And we're making some progress here, right? We got a long way to go. And that's one of the biggest battles of our fellowship is managing who are the trusted servants. And that's a problem that we're not going to solve here.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are a trusted servant and you change positions, if you rotate out of positions, someone new takes over, you got to let the SAA office know, the ISO office know down in Houston with a simple email to info@sa-recovery.org. Hey, I used to be the Area 28 chair. The new Area 28 chair is this person. Here's their phone number, email address. Simply do that. But there are links on the ISO Service website to register as a GSR, to register as an area, to register those area trusted servants. So that needs to be done and updated if we have any hope of growing this structure and this way of doing our business. What else? Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought was super awesome, and I can't wait until it's implemented, is seeing that the new map structure that is being worked on, where you'll be able to, I loved it. You able to look at a global map and then find all of the meetings, and you can click as you zoom in, click on each meeting, and it has all sorts of information about the meeting, including the area. On
that'll be great.
Yeah, on the current website, you get the list of meetings, but it doesn't really say what area it belongs to and stuff. So at least there's some clarification on this new map, and I love the functionality of it, and I can't wait till it's actually up and running. But that was really exciting to see.
Yeah, tapping into the technology.
Yeah, and speaking of the service website and things, anytime this type of information comes up, I do leave links on the podcast show notes. I don't include passwords when I'm posting this publicly, but I do have the password, and people can always email me or the ISO office. So those are definite things. Tom, I see you got your hand up there.
Yeah, this is Tom. So Sex Addict. When you were talking about I've got, 36 years of face-to-face and old school everything, and so I'm trying to get my head. I mean, I was one of the first people to get Zoom going for my group when COVID hit, for two of my groups. So I'm not totally Stone Age, but I had never used it, but I heard that, okay, there's this thing, people are already doing it. Let's find out what it is. Click around. But no, the reason I raised my hand is that there is so much potential in the electronic meetings for more areas. And it's quite possible that the people who are accessing the podcast here, hello, listeners. It's great to be with these other service-oriented guys. So, I got to remember the four of us are talking, but there might be someone actually listening later.
Mm-hmm.
If you are in electronic meetings and you want to get involved in this, you want to help build and support the organization. The idea was that an area would be like 20 to 40 groups. And so these electronic areas that represent hundreds of meetings can be split up. It's good for the organization. It wouldn't be bad for our unity as long as the groups are represented. That's the problem. These new electronic areas represent hundreds of groups, but there are only a few dozen groups actually showing up to the area meeting, I believe. But if you're listening and you know that there are groups where people are interested in service who, for whatever reason would want to do this, you can form another electronic area, whether it's by time zone or the meeting. There are a lot of different ways, language group, as long as it's within the traditions, the basis that you're using. We would love to have that come from within the electronic meetings. We could have a lot more areas there, and it would mean more groups represented in the conference. You don't need to have one person, one delegate representing 200 groups where there might be a lot of different views in there that could have their own representation. So I just want to say to the listeners, that potential is there, and you can always call the office or email the office. The email address is on the website, and tell them, hey, I want to reach out to the conference steering committee about forming another area.
Yeah, I had a question about that. And so a few years ago, there was the area alignment where they had all of the meetings divvied up from all around the world and placed all of the meetings that existed at that time into the various areas. And there was a period of time where meetings could say, hey, I don't really think that our meeting should be in this area. It should be over in this one. And so there's that little bit of time before the window closed. And then the areas were aligned. And now what I'm seeing is this is one of the business motions that I see at this year's conference is 2 areas are wanting to combine into one area. And so let's say, for instance, Area 75 that does have 230 meetings, if they wanted to split off and start a new area, does that have to go through the conference to be approved, or how does all of that work?
Yes. So, Dave, who's here with us, had brought this up, and I didn't realize it's not currently in the area handbook, and it needs to be pronto, really. Help me with that, Darren. Prioritizing that, we need to talk to the literature committee and say, do we need to write this and then you guys accept it? Because there is totally a channel and a process for a group to say we don't like our area assignment, for an area to change their boundaries. That was something that we were very intentional and careful about. Originally, there was a large contingent that thought all the area formation stuff should be bottom up from the groups. And we spent, I can't remember if it was a 2-year period or a 3-year period, where we used every communication channel we had available, which was email and surface mail and the outer circle, and announcements at the conference to say, please form your own area. Locally what makes sense to you. And then after that period of bottom-up formation passed, then the ISO went ahead and said, okay, well, we'll use whatever information we have to draw the map for everyone else. So we built in an appeals process or a change process for the groups to do that, and we just need to get the word out that exists. And I'm so glad to say that right now. There is a process for any areas to change themselves and for groups to change their assignment or form new areas. It's designed in to be bottom up like that. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Aaron, it looked like you had a thought there.
Yeah. I just want to talk to that person that's listening that doesn't feel heard or represented or doesn't feel like they're participating at the level that they really want to participate at. So there's about 90 areas. Some of them will be voted at the conference this year to increase it from about 87 to 90. And we're really only seeing about 35 areas delegates participating every year for less than half, right? Mm-hmm. So less than half of the fellowship's being represented. And so I think we could do better. And so if you're a part of an area that's currently not functioning well and you have a desire on your heart to serve in this area, it's not hard to get started. Just like we shared earlier, can you find one other person from that area to get together and talk? We have all the resources to give you to send an email, to send text, communications out to all the areas that might make up your area to invite them to that meeting. It's up to them to show up, but if you can get another person to show up, you can participate. And that, what a blessing on the fellowship that would be. So it's not that hard. It's not that complicated. It doesn't take too much time. We all have busy lives. I get it, right? Not one of us is not busy. And so don't use that as an excuse. So just dive in and go. I guarantee you'll be blessed. And there's a good chance of staying sober. And you'll help another sex addict, or you'll be blessed by getting to know some other sex addicts through that process. So, don't hesitate to reach out. It's not complicated. Yeah, I see Dave has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, went to the convention in Columbus, and myself and Langston put on a workshop on service and had conversations with several different people. And it was very rewarding that one of the guys from Pittsburgh wanted information on intergroup. And we were like, great. And then there was a guy from, I think he's Philadelphia, that says, hey, I'm in Area 10 and they have nobody doing anything. So we hooked the two of them up and now they're going to form in the area and get it rolling. So,
nice.
And it can just come from something as simple as that, just the conversation with people and then keeping in mind who's who and trying to hook these people up. And it really makes a difference.
Yeah. One of the things that I did before my workshop was reach out to the office to get the database information for the four areas that represent the Bay Area, 40, 41, 42, and 77. And unfortunately, the guy that was working on it was out on vacation. I should have contacted him about a month beforehand. It was like a week before I was going to be putting on this workshop. I since have gotten the updated information. I had the database information from 2022, and a lot more meetings have come online. Some of them have split, one in-person meeting to an in-person and a separate Zoom meeting. So yeah, our numbers here in the Bay Area have increased in terms of meeting populations, but it had all of the contact information. So I am able to use that and reach out to other people in the area and say, hey, we've got something going on here. Do you want to be part of this? And so for the areas that aren't functioning, you can still find out what area you're in, ask the office for the database information on that area, and they can send you out an Excel spreadsheet that has a list of all of the meetings and the various contacts, provided that those meetings do have updated contact information. But you can reach out to others in your area and say, hey, I want to do an area assembly, or get the area up and running, get it registered. There's the registration page. And then once you have a few officers elected in that area, you can start that up and running and get your area assemblies happening and invite all of the GSRs that are registered to that area can come to that assembly. And the ISO has a centralized email distribution that go out to specific areas. So for me, I do area 40 lists at ISO, or I can't remember the whole email, but
Right.
the one that pertains to area 40, and it goes out to anyone that is registered as a GSR in that area.
A couple other quick things I want to just mention. That we're getting long on time here.
Yep.
So every area gets one delegate. One delegate gets a vote at the conference. So there's area delegates, but there's also some other folks that get to vote in the conference. The board of trustees get votes. The Litcom get votes. The office staff have some votes. And as a fellowship, we try to do a really good job of managing the percentage of those types of things. If we had more delegates, it wouldn't be an issue with everybody getting an opportunity to have the right of participation with their vote. And so again, the more delegates we have, the more likely the voice of SAA gets expressed in a heartfelt way. So one delegate, one vote, have an alternate. You could help each other out, right? So when the delegate's not there during the conference, the alternate's there, the alternate votes, right? But one area, one vote. Let's see what else. Yeah, Tom.
Well, another message to the listener directly, not just us talking, but if you know you're in an area but it looks like nothing's happening this year, it's not too late. If your area is already registered, again, reach out to the office and say, it looks like nothing's happening in my area. How do I get a hold of the past officers? If they're not doing anything, like imagine a state where there's some big towns on one side of the state and some other big towns on the other side of the state. If you're a geographically based area, if the people on the other side of the state are kind of done, they're not doing it this year, then it could be the groups that
Yeah.
That's part of passing the torch. It's not a bad thing. You don't have to feel like you're stepping on toes or anything. I mean, you want to let everybody know to the extent you're able. You want to let everyone in the area know what's going on. Like Jason was saying, if you have a list of GSRs, you want to email all the GSRs and say, hey, we're getting this thing going again. But there are a number of areas that have attended the conference once or twice in the past, but not last year and maybe not this year. So it's totally not impolite, or stepping on toes for you to say, hey, we're falling down on this. Go ahead and you be that. We need a new terminology. You be that guy.
Person.
Guy is no longer gender specific, right?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Yeah, there's no more excuse, right? We have all those resources. The area mentors, area development can help you out. We have all those spreadsheets, all those contacts. we can give it to you tomorrow if you reach out to us. And there's time for probably 2 area meetings, right?
Mm-hmm.
My area is going to have 2 area meetings between now and October 11th.
Same.
Yeah.
You know, plenty of time. Whether you've met for the last 4 years or haven't met one time, we could do it. And we're here to help.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to participate in Area 70. I'm not Area 75 member, but I'm an Area 75 mentor. So I'm going to show up to their area assembly. I'm going to be a resource, a guide, a coach, whatever. I don't vote, but I'll be there.
Mm-hmm. Dave.
Yeah, one little tidbit I'd like to just pass on, because a lot of people know about the ISO website, the SAA-recovery.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people don't know about the service website, and that's the SAA-ISO.org. And there's just an incredible amount of information on that site. You can scroll down the banner on the left-hand side and find all these different things and click on them and get just a lot of information.
Yep. Yeah. Before we close it out, I did want to say, so in 2018, the conference and the convention split. And in 2025, they will both be together again in May, and that will be in Houston.
Austin. Where the bats are.
Yep. Yes. The miracle of editing. I'll be able to make that smooth transition. So yeah, that will be in Austin. So yeah, I'm excited about it. I've been really wanting to participate at the conference, but it always falls right near my wedding anniversary. So my wife said, nope, you're not doing that. And so I'm just like, fine, I'll help with the area. But when it comes time to elect a delegate, I'm not the person. But perhaps when it's in May, I can actually do that at some point.
Sweet.
So we are past an hour. Is there anything that anyone wants to mention before we wrap up?
Jason, I just want to say I've had to relocate a lot in my SAA recovery, and I know there are a lot of chronic relapsers in this fellowship. And I just want to say to you, if you face that, try to get involved in service. A lot of times that can be the key that turns the lock to more long-term sobriety. Don't give up and don't quit. Keep coming back, and go ahead and try service and start making service commitments. Don't feel that, because you have a lot more years in the fellowship perhaps than you have months sober, that you're not eligible, because the whole point of doing it is for your sobriety. So if that's you, don't feel that somehow what you've gone through and where you've been at disqualifies you from getting involved in this. So thanks, Jason.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
I thank you all for joining me on this episode, and it's a great way to get the message out to more than just a handful of meetings. It does go worldwide. And so I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and thank you so much, everyone.
All right, boys, I got a boat.
Right.
You guys are awesome.
Take care. Good seeing y'all.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much.
I loved having this conversation, and we have talked about various service-oriented things on the podcast before. The 12 concepts discussion that we've had, the various episodes on the tradition studies, and we've also had other episodes focused on ISO committees like the PICPC, Public Information and Cooperation with the Professional Community. So from time to time, it's really nice to be able to talk about international service. The next couple of episodes will be more focused on experience, strength, and hope stories, so we will have some of those coming up. A couple of things that I wanted to mention. At the end of this conversation, we were talking about the service website, SAA-ISO.org, and we did discuss the username and password. And usually on the podcast, I like to keep those out of the public eye. I chose to delete the comments, but unfortunately, by doing so, it also cut out another few minutes of conversation that we had around that. The 2025 convention that will be in Austin, there is a certain theme for that convention, and the username and password comes out of the name of the convention for that year. And so when we were talking about the Bats of Austin, that has something to do with the username and password. If you are interested in getting the password, you can email the ISO office at info@saa-recovery.org, and they will give you that information. I also have that information. You can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com, and I'd be happy to provide that for you. But there is so much on the service website, and I use it a lot, but I just found the service manual recently, but the conference charter is there. It's very interesting, but a lot of legalese. So I can only read it a little bit at a time before I start to get a little bit cross-eyed. So one of the goals of this episode was to help encourage some of the areas that aren't participating in the conference to get together, get a couple members together, and hold an area assembly, send a delegate to the conference in October, and have the voice of your meetings represented. And like Darren had mentioned, he is an area mentor, as well as Dave and Tom. So I was fortunate enough to join one of the CSC meetings and help get the conversation going for the podcast. Really, really grateful for Dave reaching out and making this idea happen. So while I am still thinking about it and other parts of the service website, there is information about different committees like the ICC, the LGBT outreach, prisoner outreach, the PICPC information. Also, under the ISO conference, there is the conference charter, area assembly information, including GSRs and delegate info, and I want to get back to that in just a second. Where I found the service manual was under the CSC, Conference Steering Committee. They have the 12 concepts and the service manual, and various other ISO things, but under delegate info, this is where you can find information on the 8 business motions that are going to be voted on in October. I was also part of a conversation that was recorded on Zoom on August 10th, and that was also there available under the delegate info part of the service site. And in that, they went through each of the business motions and talked about them in greater detail. So if you do have questions about any of these, you can refer to that video. There's also group registration forms, GSR forms, area registration forms, and I'll be leaving links to a lot of these in the show notes of this episode. Again, all of these are part of the password protected part of the website. For the business motions, I wanted to just run through them really quickly, not in any detail, but just to get the information out there about the things that are going to be discussed at the October conference. And I believe this is business motion number 3, which I think is going first because it has to do with votes. Bylaws to the amendment to limit the ISO Board of Trustees, the ISO Literature Committee, and the ISO staff to 1 vote each. There is another one on ratifying changes to the area alignment for some new international areas, being Nigeria, Russia, and Luxembourg. Those are areas 88, 89, and 90, and Darren referenced that in our conversation. Another one on filling vacant positions between annual meetings. The Board of Trustees, LitCom, the CSC, and the Nominating Committee, NOMCOM. All of those, there's a motion on what to do in between conferences. The next one is the incorporation of Valley of the Sun Group's Area 78 into Area 32. And this was at request and approval of both of these areas. They want to merge into one area. The next one is on the acknowledgement of foundational AA documents. In doing so, being able to sell the Alcoholics Anonymous book and the 12 Steps and Traditions book on the ISO bookstore. At a previous conference, there was a motion to remove those from the ISO bookstore. So this would be reversing that. This is one that I am really interested on, is changing the wording of Traditional 11. And instead of anonymity at the level of press, radio, TV, and films, the proposed language is anonymity at the levels of public and social media. And in order to make that change, it does have to go through the conference. There are a couple of things for approval of pamphlets. And there was one on the first step guide for intimacy and sexual avoidance. It was approved of last year and needs to be reapproved the following year in order to be conference approved. So that is one of the business motions. Another one looking for approval of a service pamphlet called Why is PICPC Work Important to Recovery? And so those are the 8 things being voted upon. And it is important that it's just not the ISO board and the various committees that are making these decisions, but rather the fellowship at large. And in order to do that, we have to have delegates at the conference. And in order for delegates to be at the conference, we need area assemblies. And going back one step further, each group should have a group service representative to represent each meeting at an area assembly. So all of this stuff is on the service website, and I will be leaving links in the show notes. So with that, I wanted to touch on a few things before closing out this episode. I did get an email or two. I think I'm going to read one here on this episode. And I did want to talk about the music and recovery episode that we just did. Episode 138, The Misfits of Recovery. I understand that a lot of people aren't really into punk and hardcore music, but those of us that are, it was a fascinating and fun conversation. I've mentioned before that I have created public playlists for my own spiritual playlists and all of the music that has been played on the podcast. And instead of adding all those songs in, I realized it was a lot. In the editing process, it took me a long time and I went overboard with that. But I created a special playlist for all of those songs because a lot of that wasn't really recovery related, but the episode was more about bonding and creating connections within SAA. So I do have playlists both on Apple Music and Spotify out there publicly. And eventually I'm going to have a spot to put the actual links instead of just saying the way how to find them. But this one is titled SARP, all in caps, Misfits of Recovery, We Are 138. And for that, I loaded it with over 70 songs. There were a few other songs that were mentioned that I didn't end up putting in the episode. So again, if you enjoyed that episode, awesome. If you didn't enjoy it, there are so many other episodes to check out. I will be doing some other music and recovery episodes in the future, and we'll probably not go this overboard again, or I hope not to, in terms of editing. But it was a lot of fun for me. So I did want to turn it over to a couple of the emails. I had emailed information about that episode to our participants, and Dylan responded, "You've outdone yourself. This episode was a blast to make, and it was a great listen. So many great songs mixed throughout the whole episode. Thanks again, Jason. Hope to be a guest again and for another discussion panel or a one-on-one conversation. Hope you're doing well. All the best." Signed, Dylan. And yeah, Dylan, I would love to have you on as a one-on-one guest or participate in a discussion. But yeah, awesome. This one we got a few weeks ago, and it says, "Hello, Jason, and hope you are doing well. First off, I wanted to express how grateful I am to you for this podcast, as the stories shared here are truly inspiring to me, and as I work through my own issues surrounding porn addiction. I believe you were in a recent noon Zoom call, which made me want to reach out to you about the podcast episode noted. Like almost everyone, my issues started very young when a neighborhood kid had a magazine. Can't remember which episode it was, but I recall the person sharing their story mentioning they can still remember the first image they ever saw. It's burned in their mind, and I can say the same thing. Crazy and sad. Being born way before the internet was a thing in the 70s, I've seen the whole progression of pornography from those magazines to what we have now today online, which brings me to the reason I wanted to reach out to you. Though it appears to be about 2 years old now, I recently came across episode 57 with John R., which included a letter you read at the end of the show from a girl named S, if you recall. Much like yourself, I was floored when you read her letter, Because much like yourself, while I never visited those campsites or had direct participation with the individuals, my eyes and soul were stolen by the many video posts of self-generated content I've seen over the years. To say that they are a real mindfuck is an understatement. To see this evolution happen has been saddening and troublesome, to say the least. My question is, I'm wondering if you ever heard any more from S. You mentioned trying to make amends by reaching out to her, and I'm wondering if you can share what, if anything, became of that. Her story is the first time I've ever heard someone on that side of the lens, and sometimes I really wonder why, as the proliferation of this content only seems to be getting worse, as IWF reports would suggest. And IWF is the Internet Watch Foundation, which is looking at child sexual abuse trends. Back to the email. I wonder how many more stories are out there yet to be told. My guess is that the powers that be realized that an open discussion would potentially only make the problem worse. That said, S mentions finding it hard to find resources about this topic, as do I. And I'm wondering if you might be aware of any resources or discussion boards outside of SAA about this phenomenon. So there's much I can say about this topic and so many questions. I can totally echo S's sentiment about feeling like a great experiment was conducted, not only affecting her generation, but mine as well. It's been said many times, and I'm sure you've heard it before, that most people would not be into this kind of content had it not been presented to them so freely. There were no warning signs on the doors we opened back in the day. It was the proverbial train wreck you couldn't take your eyes off of. Much appreciated. Any feedback you can offer. Signed, Jay. Jay, thank you so much for your email. And yes, I do remember that episode. And to be honest, I never fully finished writing that response to S. I had started writing it. I had gotten a little uncomfortable and also very, very busy at the time. And I never came back to it and never sent it. There are only a handful of emails that I've either gotten too busy and have forgotten about or just had a hard time responding to. And that was one of them. So seeing this email, I will see if I can do anything to reach out to her again. And yeah, that is on me. Occasionally there are things like that that are just really hard to respond to. As far as outside resources, I'm not really sure, but I can look to see what I can find. I know that SAA does have a subreddit, which is r/SEXAA. And a lot of that, people do pose questions about various things. Some of it is outside causes, and people will try to respond the best way they can. And other times they do mention this as an outside cause, and you should look elsewhere for an answer. But it is a great resource. I'm on there occasionally responding. I originally found this through the SAA-recovery.org website. On their list of meetings, and down at the bottom of the page, there was a listing for the Reddit group. I haven't really talked about that on the podcast, but yeah, I do occasionally post stuff there. And I've got a weird handle on there that I would love to be able to change, but I haven't quite figured out how to do that. I will occasionally post things about the podcast there, but that would be a great resource. If you're within SAA and want to get other information from other sex addicts, I know that a couple of my groups, we do have other forums for doing so. We've got like a WhatsApp group in the noon Zoom meetings. We're starting to get a Microsoft Teams group up and running. And so there are various forums that are outside of the meeting structure of a way to ask for advice and things on how to deal with certain issues. And those are some of them. So I hope that helps. And thank you so much for the email. Because I do wish to get this episode out today. I think that will be it. I know there's a lot of music stuff that has been going on in my life, and I'm going to have to save that for another day. And so with that, I will close out this episode. If you wanted to leave feedback for the podcast like this one, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com, or if you wanted to get a hold of me personally, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. I thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope it helped clarify some things about the SAA service structure. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.